Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We are visiting with Alex Kuhn, who is Executive Director of the Massillon Museum. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
You always have so many cool things going on right now, and I'm particularly interested right now in Stark County in the Great War, which began last month but goes all the way through November, 100 years since World War I. The war to end all wars.
Right.
Which, if only,
so to speak,
it would have. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with this and what we can look forward to at the museum.
Sure. So at the Massillon Museum, as an art and history museum, we always pride ourselves in attempting to reflect topics that are not only of local and regional interest, but of global interest, or at least we try to place local or regional narratives in a global context. Mm-hmm. And anniversaries of major events allow us an opportunity to explore those topics and themes. And with 2017 being the 100-year anniversary of the United States involvement in World War I, we looked at it as an opportunity to showcase this, increasingly lesser remembered war. Obviously distance from an event makes it less present in the consciousness of people. It's just human nature. So we really wanted to do our best to highlight the individuals from the Stark County area who dedicated who gave of their lives or devoted their service to this conflict.
What kinds of artifacts did you find to go in this exhibit, and how did you go about finding those?
So our curator, Heather Hayden, and our archivist, Mandy Pond, worked with a team of other volunteers and interns to identify not only artifacts within our collection, like uniforms and photographs, propaganda posters, which play a prominent role visually in this exhibition, but they also visited oral histories, and Mandy Pond, our archivist, created a 30-minute documentary film that's looping in the gallery that runs about every half hour when you visit. And it highlights the Stark County perspective of World War I. Now, these oral histories were captured, some of them in the 70s, some in the 80s and the 90s, because we don't have any World War I veterans with us any longer.
Right.
So unlike opportunities we've been given to present exhibits focused on World War II, which, firsthand narratives are also becoming increasingly rare now.
Right.
But, we had to reference source material in our archives. But we also hosted a community archives day that was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it allowed us to host a day where members of the community could bring their artifacts to us for consideration of placement in the exhibition. Mm-hmm. So diaries, uniforms, medals, other military equipment, and Red Cross materials, a lot of really great artifacts that allowed our team to tell the story of not only civilian life, but of what life was like from a soldier's perspective.
Yes, yes. What was the most unique item that you got a chance to see, or what surprised you the most?
There is. Oh, that's a really good question.
I'm sure there's so many you have to, and I don't mean to throw you for a loop, but there's got to be so many to search through.
Well, what was really interesting is, and this isn't a physical artifact, but the oral histories shed light on the influenza epidemic that resulted from the soldiers having brought back previously unknown illnesses, and the extent to which Massillon and Stark County, well, the whole of the United States, but the extent to which our local community was impacted was something I'd not known about. They had to convert schools to hospitals. So many people perished, for lack of access to any remedy for this. And hearing the veterans recall their memories of entire buildings in downtown Massillon having been converted, and schools being closed, and organizations halting all of their gatherings to lessen exposure to this epidemic. I mean, the millions of people who perished, it was just, they were staggering numbers. So it was really interesting to learn about how that impacted our community.
And how a community came together to respond to it. Downton Abbey fans will remember when that was all going on in those episodes as well, where their beautiful mansion got turned into a reformatory.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that. Absolutely. So I think the stories that were shared by those who we were fortunate to have heard from 20 years ago, I think were really valuable. But there's also there's some amazing photographs about the African Americans who served in the war, who were part of regiments that were segregated, but the role that groups of individuals played in the European theater in allegiance with, their, white counterparts that couldn't then be, lined up here at home when they returned was a really interesting story too.
Just, again, unbelievable, and kind of goes along with the story we heard yesterday about William Powell serving in World War II and then not being able to play golf on the very golf courses he played on in high school once he had returned as a veteran after offering up everything. And same with these gentlemen who served in World War I to come back. We owe you our freedom, and that they were able to put their lives on the line to get that kind of a welcome home is unbelievable to us today.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think that when you see the uniforms displayed in the context of the exhibition, and you see the different accoutrements that they had, and all that these men had to carry on their backs and with them in the event that they would have to dig trenches for shelter, and just all the different sort of assigned military tools are really interesting to view, and again further make you appreciate
all that we
have, the freedom that we have, all that we have, and so I think that it was really important that we showcase the memory that we're able to tap into of this experience right now. And the propaganda posters also, as I said, they're really visually prominent. And it's incredible to think of how present they were in storefronts and the windows of homes, in schools, with really blatant messaging about who the enemies were and what the role of Americans should be in helping to illustrate patriotism, and just a very different time in
I
our
don't
history.
recall, for World War I, were there anti-war movements at that point? Did everyone seem to be sort of like on the same team, that there was a surge of patriotism at that point, that they had this common enemy?
That's a really great question. I can't speak entirely to that, but I would imagine the answer is yes. I mean, even North Canton changed its name during that period, got together, and different residents of what was New Berlin,
that's right,
congregated to sign petitions to change the name to North Canton in order to misalign any affiliation with Germany.
Wow.
And so for whole communities to come together and make those kinds of decisions, I mean, it's unfathomable to think we would do that today. Although there's certainly a lot of sentiment in the United States at this time that's quite hateful and antagonistic toward certain groups of people. But I think that the extent to which women, too, who weren't allowed to be on the battlefield, they also were able to show support through joining with the Red Cross, or to hold different drives and such at home, to knit and, like crazy for the cause. And so there, I don't know. I'm sure there were some anti-war factions, but that's a great question. I'd have to look more into.
Since you bring up the women, let's take a look at what's coming up July 25th. You've got Women in World War I. Dr. Leslie, is it Heafy?
Heafy.
Who's going to be presenting that? Tell us about that program. That looks very interesting.
Yeah, Dr. Heafy is chair of the history department at Kent State University at Stark, and she's a longtime collaborator with the Massillon Museum. And we've asked her to highlight the various roles that women played in the war, because it's very highlighted. When you think of war, you think of conflict, and you think of men being associated with the battlefield historically. And so she's going to highlight the ways in which women were able to participate as patriots.
What's happening on September 6th with Dr. Molly Sergi?
Oh, yeah. So Dr. Molly Sergi she is going to be the guest lecturer for our very first history happy hour. So we're going to experiment with being open later in the evenings for working professionals who aren't able to join us. We typically close at 5. So she's going to talk about women and also the idea of memory and how I believe how different mechanisms like oral histories and diaries help inform our understanding of historic events, and also the grains of salt with which those things realistically need to be taken because they're based on memory. And I know from personal experience, obviously, especially, our memory and perception can be impacted by so many different things and not necessarily, regarded as fact. However, so often all we have is oral tradition and diary and written accounts and memory on which to base our understanding of history. So I believe she's going to speak to those.
And history is written by the winners.
That's right.
So there's always another perspective to everything that's been going on.
Absolutely.
I love this. Women on the Move, fashions from the Great War era. We're going to look at some fashions from World War I.
Yes. Can you tell there's a female director in place at the Massillon
I'm
Museum now?
loving this vein you're on here. This is good.
Yes. Well, and actually we, again, balance between art and history, balance between perspectives, and gender representation is something that we're all as a staff really supportive of, and it's really core to our mission. But so Laura Lowe, who is a known fashion historian from the region, is going to be presenting at a luncheon that is a fundraiser for our capital campaign to expand the facility at the MAPS Museum.
Perfect.
On Wednesday, September 20th. So visitors will be surrounded by aircraft, and adjacent to where the lecture will be held is an exhibit that they've assembled on World War I. So anyone attending the lecture can also have access to the museum.
And it will be a fashion show.
And it will be a fashion show on mannequins because so many of the garments of the era would not fit women today. So contemporary fashions reflect for the most part, the builds that women illustrate today. And 100 years ago, the waists were so much smaller. There's, of course, corseting and a lot of other factors that led to that. But shapes have just evolved over time, and so fashion has too. So there really wouldn't be anyone who could model any of the garments. So they'll be on dress forms.
Tiny little mannequins.
Tiny mannequins.
Gotcha.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Monday, Elaine Weiss, Fruits of Victory, the Woman's Land Army of America and the Great War. I've not heard of the Woman's Land Army of America.
Mm-hmm. That lecture will be given at the National First Ladies Library. They are a partner with us in programming for this exhibition. So they actually have a family program on July 15th at their site. And then this program in the fall will talk about victory gardens and how Americans were encouraged to participate also in the effort by growing their own vegetables and in support of, the economy overall. And,
right. Yes. And again, a time when the entire community got on board and worked together. Victory gardens were huge. And then in November, the Letters Home program, Dear Mother and All. Oh, tell us about that.
So this play was written about 30 years ago by a woman named Sandra Perlman, who she's still with us, active, and she's, I think, affiliated with the Kent Historical Society. But she became aware of a collection of letters in the Massillon Museum collection that were written to family members by a World War I soldier, Charles Vernon Brown, who was from Massillon, letters to home and letters written to him. He unfortunately perished in the war. And so these letters serve as a really beautiful, comprehensive document of his experience and that of his family members here in Massillon, Ohio. And so she authored a play based solely on the letters. And we are going to revive it. It was performed, I think, once in the early 80s, produced by the Massillon Museum. And so we are going to revive that. One of our board members, David Harding, who's a retired teacher, has taken on that challenge, and we will produce it at the Lions Lincoln Theater in Massillon on November 12th. It's the same date as the exhibition close.
So you can see all of these programs affiliated with the Stark County in the Great War exhibit going through November 12th. And your website?
MassillonMuseum.org. Admission to the Massillon Museum is always free. A few of the programs we've discussed do have associated charges, but for the most part, our programs are free of charge, and admission is always free.
Very awesome. We'll be back with Alex after these words. You're listening to Our Community.